In this episode, we dig into the ADHD masking trifecta that most of us master maskers did or maybe still do to function with ADHD. And we'll explore the signs that it is no longer working for you and what to do instead. This is essential, especially for ADHD women entrepreneurs, both because we need to show up authentically in our business and because masking in this way ends up manifesting in other negative ways, including difficulty functioning, the whole thing that our inner system is trying to prevent. By the end of this episode, you'll be able to spot when the masking isn't working and what to do about it instead. Be sure to listen. Welcome to the Self-Loved ADHD Woman's Way podcast. I'm your host, Jen Barnes. If you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur, ADHD adjacent, or ADHD-ish, you've come to the right place. We'll dive deep into the unique challenges you face, from the inner turmoil to the outer obstacles. We'll blend neuroscience, IFS, and somatic healing, and explore practical strategies to help you navigate the world of entrepreneurship with ADHD with greater ease and effectiveness. I'm glad you're here. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. The ADHD masking trifecta: overfunctioning, people-pleasing, and perfectionism. I gotta suspect I'm not the only one who adopted those masks subconsciously as a child, right? Like in some way, our younger selves were like, we got to figure out this world business, and figured that when we overfunctioned, when we people pleased, when we were perfectionistic about things, we were able to do great things. We were able to achieve well. And in a lot of ways, that has served many of us. I know that had I not had those masks, I likely would not have made it through grad school or even through my undergraduate degree in mathematics. And at the same time, these masks created other problems for me throughout my life. And if you've heard my story, you know what some of those are, but we'll talk about some of the challenges of these masks later. But I want to say, in some ways, we can be grateful that our younger selves figured out a way to function with our ADHD in this neurotypical world. So these aren't things to be ashamed of. And really, I'm not a fan of shame anyway. It doesn't really do anything all that great. Guilt, fine if you do something wrong, but shame, not particularly useful. So I want to just honor that the parts of you that did this to protect you were trying to help. They were, like I said, at its core, trying to protect you, right? That's what these behaviors are. And ultimately, trying to keep you from what would happen, or their fear at least about what would happen if you didn't do these things. And sure, this can be a bit different for each of us, the underlying fear, but there are some common underlying fears that fuel the overfunctioning, that fuel the people pleasing, that fuel the perfectionism between people. And to understand that, first, I want to talk a little bit about Kohlberg's theory of moral development. We're not going to break down the whole thing. What's important to understand is that up to about age 7, this is average ages, up to around age 7, our focus is on getting rewards and avoiding punishment. And that is ultimately what we are trying to do, is avoid getting in trouble and be rewarded for things. So up through age 7, we're talking through first grade. And so at that age, we were just trying to stay out of trouble and trying to get accolades for what we were doing. That is normal in that stage of development. And so any parts of us that were trying to help us and may have started to develop these behaviors of overfunctioning, people pleasing, and perfectionism did it out of the need to avoid punishment and seek reward. And then as you head in towards the next stage of moral development, we begin to be more motivated and focused on, at least from an ethical perspective, moral, I should say, moral perspective, on external ethics, external guidelines, external expectations, what society expects. And so you think like second grade up until we're adults, we're really, a lot of us are focused on what people on the outside think. And that is super common. That's why he has this theory. That is something that we do. And so when you consider those two stages of moral development, it helps us understand why our younger selves adopted these ways of masking, right? So, overfunctioning, I don't know about you, but for me, I saw other kids getting in trouble for things. And now I look back and I think to myself, oh, you know what? Those kids had ADHD for sure. And so my younger self, a part of me figured, well, we're not going to get in trouble like that. And so I learned to overfunction. I learned to work really, really hard, harder than others to get by and even do really well. Also, I enjoyed the accolades because when I overfunctioned, I achieved highly. I got fantastic grades, and my teachers would always tell my parents what a good student I was. I was very conscientious, all those things. They also told them that I talked too much, but there was grace for my talking, quote unquote, too much because I was achieving so well. So that overfunctioning not only kept me out of trouble and gave me the accolades, it also gave me some grace around the parts of my ADHD that I couldn't figure out how to mask yet so that I didn't get in as much trouble for them. So your younger parts may or may not have figured that out with overfunctioning, or it might be some other reason that your younger parts overfunction. But for me, it was that fear of getting in trouble and that desire to be rewarded with positive feedback that really drove the overfunctioning mask for me from a very young age. People pleasing often is more about people not liking us. And sure, I remember doing a little bit of people pleasing in first grade, but really, that started a little bit later in elementary school, which is in line with Kohlberg's theory, because that's when we're focused on the external. And a lot of times, people pleasing can be rooted in the fear of people not liking us, which is actually, from an evolutionary standpoint, unsafe. Because in order to survive from an evolutionary perspective, we needed to belong. We need to be kept in the tribe, so to speak. And in order to do that, a lot of us learned to people please. So, and we had that mask so that we wouldn't get rejected for our ADHD. And some of it is also about not believing we can handle it when people are mad at us or don't like us. A lot of us ADHDers are highly sensitive, and that is not uncommon. And so when people don't like us or are mad at us, it can make us crumble. It can really, really sting. I remember my mom telling me really throughout my life until the end of hers, oh my gosh, Jen, I wish you just could learn to move on and get over things. And I have learned some of that. It's not that I don't remember some of the things that were said and don't remember the wounds, but I am able to not let things hit my heart as much. I can't say I completely disconnected from other people's opinions, but at least when it does sting, I'm able to work through it more rapidly and move on, at least enough to keep functioning so it's not derailing me the way it used to. And to me, this is all connected to the people pleasing because a lot of us learned, I can't handle that. So we just try and keep everyone else happy. And it makes sense because we're just trying to belong so that we are connected and are safe. Our younger selves didn't consciously think this. These are all subconscious ways that we masked. None of us, I can't imagine, none, that any of us sat there as second and third graders like, if I people please, that's gonna do well for me. I'm gonna have connections and friends, right? And we'll talk as we get into more of the problems of that, what kind of friends those people were when we got them through people pleasing. But for now, none of us thought that through. It was just something we figured out that, oh, if I do this, people like me. People don't reject me. People aren't as annoyed by me, which we didn't know. At least I didn't know that some of the things that would have annoyed people had I not masked them was my ADHD, both the adults and the peers that I had in my life at the time. Perfectionism, I see as rooted in avoidant of punishment and getting rewards. And at its core, we are just trying to get it right and have people appreciate us. So there's a relational aspect to it as well. What I notice in a lot of perfectionists is fear. I remember this in myself, actually. I remember being in therapy in my 20s and my therapist talking to me about my perfectionism and shifting it. And I was like, I can't stop. I can't stop being a perfectionist because if I do that, then I won't do anything. And same with my anxiety that was closely linked to my perfectionism, overfunctioning, and people pleasing. I was like, I can't stop feeling anxious because if I stop feeling anxious, I won't do anything. And that's a common fear, especially with ADHD women because our anxiety in some way has been used to drive us. Some of these other things, like people pleasing, perfectionism, and overfunctioning, have been used to drive us to do stuff with ADHD. And they're not effective long term, which we're going to get into. But as you can see, all three of these ADHD masking methods, if you will, methods makes it sound like we chose it. It was much more subconscious than that. But all three of them have in common fear and protection. And there's a long-term problem with each. Sure, in the short term and maybe even semi-long term, right? Because it wasn't short term to go from preschool through graduate school graduation at 31. So certainly there was some benefit, though by the time I got to grad school, I was doing a lot less of the was I doing a lot less? I was doing less of the perfectionism. I was still doing a lot of people pleasing, still doing a lot of overfunctioning. So in some ways, that is a longer term like benefit, but longer term, as we got more into our 30s and into our 40s, and if you're like me and 50 or older, you notice that this stuff really, really takes a toll. So I want to get into that because while these things can work for a while, eventually they do take a toll and not only stop working, but negatively impact in other ways. When we look at overfunctioning, one of the things that is most common is burnout. I've been there. I've been there more than once. The overfunctioning leads to burnout. And not only is that a problem when we're burned out, but in general, a lot of us developed really unhealthy work habits with a lack of self care, rest, and time for fun. Anyone else? And in doing so, then we can get burned out over and over again. A lot of us can be in this not function, but in this, I can't think of the word I want, but we can be in this pattern of pushing and then crashing for a day or 2 or 3, and then pushing and overfunctioning and crashing for a week. And that can be how we do things. And that might work for a while. Eventually, that takes a toll on our nervous system and starts to negatively impact our health, not to mention our mental health. So eventually, we want to find ways out of the overfunctioning. And if you're in your 20s, you might be like, good, I still got some time. I would suggest the younger you figure out how to get out of these masking patterns, the more it might serve you so that you don't end up with some of the painful experiences some of us older ladies have had by continuing to mask well into our 30s and maybe some in 40s, 50s, and beyond. People pleasing, in my experience and what I noticed, is as a people pleaser, what I ended up with were not friends. I ended up with people who I thought were my friends, but when I really started to understand what was going on, they were people who only appreciated me for what I could give to them, which is not friendship. With friendship, there is mutuality, there's a balance between give and take. Both people enjoy spending time with each other, and I did not have that balance in my friendships when I was still people pleasing. I didn't get out of people pleasing until probably around 35, even though I started working on it when I first went to therapy. That one was a long one to get away from, especially because, in my opinion, culturally, a lot of us women are trained to be people pleaser. We're trained to be nice and just be quiet and get along and be peaceful and not upset anyone. I'm like, back in the day, I get that. To some, maybe I get it. I don't know if I get it. It's just that doesn't work anymore, especially not the roles women have now. So, let me say something about that. One of the things I notice about men that used to really make me mad and sometimes still irritates me, but I've shifted to how I think about it. So let me share that. I've noticed how men don't really, not all men, but a lot of men don't really consider what other people think all that much when they make a decision. They're not necessarily thinking, oh, how's this person going to feel? Or how would that impact this person? I've noticed a lot of men just think about how it'll impact them. And I don't necessarily think that we should entirely shift to that model. However, I think women don't do that enough. I would love to see men come into more balance where they are considering others. And I would like to see us come into more balance where we are not always so hyper considerate of others that we end up punishing ourselves over and over again because we never choose ourselves. And you might notice what that feels like in your body. If you're noticing stuff come up and you're like, oh, that would be selfish, that might be some work for you to do and get curious about why it would be selfish to value yourself first. And if you think, well, I should value myself last, then the question is, if you have a daughter or a niece or a little girl who you love, would you want her to value herself less because she's a girl? It's just something to think about. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. That's a pattern I see. And as I've noticed, and it's just simple stuff, but even just deciding where they want to go eat, they'll just say where they want to eat instead of being like, I don't know, where do you want to go? I don't know, where do you want to go? They're just, they say, I want to go here. That doesn't mean it has to be that way. They just say what they want. And so a lot of us are afraid to do that because we're afraid we'll be rejected. And maybe in women's circles, we might be. So I understand there could be some value in that. However, what I've noticed is the people pleasing that ends up with really inauthentic friends who don't really care about you. And as I stepped out of the people pleasing, I have developed these amazing friendships, really deep friendships where there is regular connection, mutual enjoyment and support, and a balance between give and take. Something I put in my gratitude journal every single day. So if that sounds polished, that's why. And it took letting go of people pleasing to do that because the quality of our relationships can't be very high if all we're doing is trying to please the other person. All that does is leads to them not caring all that much about us and us not getting our needs met, which eventually can end up in resentment, anger, and loneliness, even inside of relationships. When we think about perfectionism, a common challenge is burnout. It can also make it really hard to start things with ADHD. And if you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur, you probably know this. If you've been wanting to do a podcast for a while, for example, but you just can't get yourself to do it, check out and see. Do you have parts of you that think perfectionism is required, that yours wouldn't be good enough. It has to be perfect or some variation of perfect. Because a lot of times that mask that you took on that worked for a really long time may no longer be working if you're noticing difficulty getting started. Same if you're noticing difficulty completing things because you're constantly tweaking and shifting things so that it's perfect. And something I learned this in some ways a long time ago, but I relearned it with my business when I was in a program with someone. And he always said, how did he say that? 70% perfect is perfect, 100% perfect is failure, which I thought was brilliant. And what he meant by that was that when you aim for 100% perfection, you fail because you can't have it be 100% perfect, which means you never put it out there. If you're going for 100% perfection so that you never put yourself out there, then you're never going to get any results. So it's a matter of overcoming that perfectionism. And as a business owner, it can be a real problem with being able to do the things you need to do for your business, especially the hairy, scary things like asking people to work with you and making offers, letting your voice be heard and known, sharing your opinion, making mistakes. You've heard me bumble over my words several times in this podcast, and I don't tell my VA to necessarily edit that out always because I'm like, that's how human conversation goes. And I have ADHD, so sometimes it's gonna happen. All of these things together, all of this burnout, inauthentic relationships, difficulty starting and completing things, all of that, all of the problems of these masks long term can manifest in things like anxiety, depression, like we talked about, burnout, even chronic fatigue, which is really hard to get out of, as well as low quality relationships and even shame. I want to unpack a little bit the piece about anxiety and depression. What I noticed in myself and what I notice in the ADHD women I work with, both that I've worked with throughout my time in private practice, well, even in the field of mental health for over 24 years now, is that when we are focused on perfectionism and people pleasing and over functioning, we get anxious. We get super anxious. And I've noticed that as I let go of those things, I can still get anxious occasionally, but nowhere near what I used to because I've shifted from my focus being outward to being inward. I've shifted my focus to being aligned with my own values versus the external values, like we do in our earlier stages of moral development. And that doesn't mean I don't care about others. That doesn't mean I don't take others into consideration. But it does mean I also have a place at the table. I also get a voice in my own life and the loudest one. That in and of itself has helped clear my anxiety. And sure, there's other things too. I exercise every day. I am a yoga teacher, do yoga regularly, meditate daily. I write, all kinds of stuff. And letting go of the overfunctioning, the perfectionism, and the people pleasing is one of the best things I did to reduce anxiety. We'll talk a little bit more about how in the heck to do that in a little bit. As far as depression, one of the things when I really lean in and get clear about what was beneath my depression, when I feel depressed, what is often beneath that? And when I look at other people too, now, certainly there are things that go on in the brain that can make someone more likely to get depressed. And what I also notice is a lot of people, both in myself and others I've worked with, when they feel depressed, are not feeling connected to their highest self. They're not feeling connected with who they are, not connected to things that light up their soul. They're not really getting to do anything fun. And that doesn't mean, oh, go do fun stuff and you won't be depressed. Let me be clear, that's not what I'm saying. Clinical depression is serious. And if you're in a place where you're having severe depression and you're suicidal, it is essential to seek the support of a mental health professional. to work through that and possibly even consider medication. Again, talk with your doctor about that. And sometimes what can be one piece of the fuel for that depression fire is a disconnect from yourself. And when you think about these ways of masking, overfunctioning, people pleasing, and perfectionism, they all require you to disconnect from yourself. Overfunctioning means you disconnect from your bodily cues that it's time to stop, that you need rest, that you need fun. People pleasing is entirely focused on people outside of yourself, not really on yourself. Yes, ultimately, you're trying to benefit yourself by not getting in trouble and having people like you, not having people reject you, and not having to deal with people being mad at you. And your focus is outward. Same with perfectionism. Some of it is inward in the sense that you want to feel good enough, that you want to feel capable. And yet, it's still a lot of times can be focused outward on what other people are going to think and if you can handle their judgment. So, when you're feeling depressed, this could be a piece of it. And it might not be all of it, like I said. So, make sure you're taking care of depression as needed. At the same time, it's important to understand that these masks can contribute to it. All right. So, I want to get to what to do about it. And I wish I had a simple answer. This should be like the complex answer podcast. Because what we talk about on this show is not about simple things. We don't talk about how to fix your funnel or the perfect email that you can write. Perfect. See, there we go. Isn't that interesting? But the way you can send an email to get more leads, those things are more concrete. They're steps you can take that are going to be more fast acting. And the result is present more quickly. And as much as I'd like to say there's a quick fix, these problems, these patterns have developed over time for many of us over our lifetime. And when we first become aware of the problems that these masks that were initially helpful create, then it's going to take some work to shift because chances are we haven't been doing them for only 10 years, only 5 years, only 2 years. By the time we catch these masks and notice that they're not working, we've probably been doing them for at least 10, 20, 30 years. And that takes some time to shift out of because these are long-standing patterns. And not only does it take time, it takes energy, it takes focus, it takes a willingness to do the work. So I'm going to share what to do. And it's not a quick fix. But first, what I want to say is each of these 3 masks, the trifecta of ADHD masking, has limiting beliefs that fuel it. And those need to be addressed first. Because you can have all the tools and strategies, but unless you're addressing these underlying limiting beliefs and the parts who hold them, none of that other stuff is going to work. Sure, at the end of this episode, I'll teach you my favorite strategy for regulating your nervous system. That works both if you're shut down and in your fight or flight response. But ultimately, that's only going to work for so long until you deal with the deeper stuff. That's why a lot of people, I did this. We go to therapy in our 20s and we learned all kind of really good tools and strategies. And then we get older and that shit stops working because there's deeper underlying stuff that needs to be done. Especially if you're in my generation, if you're a Gen Xer, the therapy that people did back in the day when we went was rarely addressing the underlying stuff. Not never. It's just that back then, they didn't know how important that was. I didn't know how important that was when I first went into the field. The first 5 years I was in the field, I had no idea. I was starting to have a little bit more of a clue, maybe 6 or 7 years in, but even still, the industry really didn't understand the impact of the past and how it creates these limiting beliefs and that there's a need to unpack this. So, first, I want to talk about some of the underlying limiting beliefs for overfunctioning. Often there can be a limiting belief that you need to get it all done so that you have to push and push to do it. And that if you don't get it all done, in some way you're not good enough, people will see you as incapable or lazy. You won't get grace for your ADHD and other ways it shows up. Perhaps you'll be judged. And though that set of limiting beliefs needs to be addressed. And you might be like, but Jen, I will be judged if I don't get it all done. Yes, that may be true. But the limiting belief is that you couldn't handle it or that you would care. Listen, I get it. It's not fun to be judged. No one likes to be judged. I can't imagine anyone likes to be judged. Maybe narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths don't care. I don't know for sure. Well, actually, narcissists care because that's why they get so intense when they're judged or poked at. But generally speaking, most of us care when we're judged. It's just that we can shift the limiting belief that we can't handle it, and we can learn how to handle it when we're judged. We can learn to say, not everyone's going to like me, and start to believe it and start to shift that. And to me, what that takes is working with some of our younger parts that don't see us as grown-ups, that don't see our highest self, our inner wise woman, and think we're still young and can't handle when someone says something. That doesn't mean it doesn't still sting. It's just that we we can handle it. We can handle it when we respond to things from our either adult functioning from day-to-day life part of ourselves or our highest self. So some of the work with overfunctioning is going to be identifying your own unique limiting belief. And like I said, you might look around in the area of needing to get it all done or else something happens. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can get clear on this once I go through all three of them. So with people pleasing, I want to say first, I think I might have said this. Maybe I thought it in my head and didn't say it yet. People pleasing is definitely a learned behavior in women. We were taught to people please, to be loved and accepted. So many women come to therapy, come to coaching with this mask, but just even in general with this behavior, this learned behavior. With ADHD, it can be a bit stronger because it ties into our worth around our ADHD. And when you lean in and get curious about the limiting belief, yeah, some of it's going to be around people won't like me, but that might be true. There are going to be people who don't like you when you stop people pleasing, especially the people who are benefiting from you people pleasing. They're not going to like it. They're going to get angry because you're taking away what they had from you. That doesn't mean you should keep doing it. They just don't like it. But that doesn't mean they get to decide what you do. It means that you get to get clear on what kind of people you want in your life. But to do that, one of the first pieces is to work with the younger parts of you that don't think you can handle it. Because I know your adult self. I know that your highest self, beyond your adult functioning parts, can handle it. And that when you can't, when someone rejects you or there's judgment or criticism and you crumble, chances are that is younger parts of you that are getting triggered. So there is work to do there so that you can stop people pleasing. I did it the other way around because that was what therapists told people to do in their 20s. It did not go well for me because I couldn't handle people's anger yet. And I started setting boundaries and not people pleasing. And then people got mad. And let's just say it was a lot of drama and really, really hard. I got through it. And what I will recommend is if you can heal some of that stuff, even just enough of it. I'm not saying you have to be like a 100% healed person to own a business or be able to move beyond these masks. But if you can heal some of those wounds of being hurt by things people said and build your younger parts trust that you're adult you, or at least if not your highest self, and if not your highest self, your adult you can handle it, right? And then you can stop the people pleasing. You can do it the other way around. Just know that like when you stop doing the people pleasing, the people who've been benefiting from it are usually not kind about it because they're not your friend. They've been really kind of using you for what you've been doing. So I'll just say that. Perfectionism, when you look for the limiting belief that you might have around that, there's often something around not being good enough, not being capable, you can't handle judgment, something around mistakes, like not being able to handle mistakes or mistakes being bad. You may have grown up in the fixed mindset where a mistake means you failed and you don't have it, instead of the growth mindset where mistakes are learning opportunities and ways to grow. And if you have that old mindset, the fixed mindset, it's going to be really hard in entrepreneurship because things are going to not go well all the time, or the way you intended, I should say. And if you break down every time that happens or you can't handle it, you're going to have a very hard time because in business, things are just an experiment. You're just trying stuff. And, oh, does this marketing thing work? What if I say this? How about this messaging? And so you're not going to get it perfect. Part of fine tuning and honing things in is allowing yourself to make mistakes. And I wouldn't even call them mistakes, but to try things and have it not work and then you tweak it. So when you're struggling with getting away from the perfectionism, I invite you to consider what parts of you are concerned about mistakes, what parts are concerned about not being able to handle the the judgment of other people, or concerned, maybe have feelings that you're not good enough if you're less than quote unquote perfect. And how might one do this? How might one figure this out? Well, I suggest that you lean in and get really curious. And what you can do is say, what is the concern if I stopped people pleasing? What is the concern if I stopped my perfectionism? What is the concern if I stopped overfunctioning? Or what is the concern if I only worked this many hours a day? And see what comes up. I personally am big into writing, but writing this out, see what comes up. That's where the work is. You can start to figure out some of the limiting beliefs there. Sometimes limiting beliefs can be really hard to see for yourself. So that's why I recommend working with a coach like me who's really experienced in it. Even a therapist can help with some of this, depending on the therapist. I prefer IFS therapists for this kind of work, just what I recommend. So, really getting curious, leaning in, getting curious, and having compassion. I can I suspect that there is a part of you that just wants to push all this down and be like, stop this. The perfectionism, the people pleasing, the overfunctioning isn't going to work anymore. Let's just stop it and push it away. And I will tell you that is super ineffective because when parts are pushed down, really think about when you've pushed feelings down, what happens? Does it just stay down all nice and pleasant and never resurfaces at inconvenient times? No, absolutely not. When you push feelings down, they come back up. And they may come up externally in outbursts or quote unquote outbursts, big emotions. They may implode in health problems or depression. So, holding in feelings, pushing down parts that are doing something to try and help you is very ineffective. They often trust you less when you do that and then are going to hang on to the things they're doing because they're like, yeah, you don't get it. So I need to be even more perfectionistic. I need to work even harder and function even more because you, my friend, are clueless because you want to get rid of me. So that's not the approach. The approach is to lean in and get really curious with compassion and even gratitude that these parts have helped you get to where you are now. You don't have to like the way things show up now, but to recognize that perhaps without these behaviors, without these parts doing this, you wouldn't be where you are now. The good stuff, right? So it's important to take time to do this work. And I will tell you that it may seem like it's not easy, and it might not be easy. And if it feels like it's too much for you emotionally, reach out, send me an email. I'll put a link in the comments for an application to one-to-one coaching, and just so we can have a conversation. The other option too, in my program Ascend, you get, right now at least, while the program is still small, you get 12 one-to-one coaching sessions with me as well as the whole program. And so we work on these kind of limiting beliefs there. So if you want support in doing this, know that I offer support for it. And there's probably other coaches who do as well. So give yourself the benefit of working through this so that you can let go of the perfectionism, the people pleasing, and the overfunctioning in productive and effective ways, and then be able to really show up authentically in your business and just crush it. Now, since we talked about working through big feelings and challenging thoughts and beliefs, I want to talk a little bit about nervous system regulation. We're not going to spend a little bit of time on it. We're actually going to spend a little bit of time on it, not a lot of time on it. Real quick, if you find yourself getting triggered into your fight or flight or shutdown response, so if you're feeling really wired up after doing some of this or feeling completely shut down and immobile, I'm going to tell you one thing you can do to help both those. It's my favorite. I have talked about it on the podcast before. It's called volcano breathing. And so what you do is you bring your hands together at heart center. So you bring your palms together in front of your heart. And on an inhale breath, reach your arms all the way up overhead. And then as you exhale, bring your arms down around by your side. And you'll do that at least 2 more times. Nice and slow breath. That can help regulate your nervous system. Going for a walk can help you do that, not on your phone, but going for a walk, hugging a tree. And if you're so shut down that you can't even get up off the couch, visualizing movement can help. All right, y'all. I'm grateful you're here. I will put the link in the show notes, both for an application to one-on-one coaching if you think you'd like to work with me one-on-one outside of the program Ascend, the ADHD Women's Mastery Program, or if you're interested in learning more about the program, I'll put a link for that in the chat at the very bottom of the page that I'll share with you. You can book a clarity call with me, which is not a coaching call. It's a call to talk about if the program would be a fit for you. So just know that. All right. Thanks for being here. May you enjoy your week. Take care.